So we're looking at part 3 of our sermon for this morning, Born Again, part 3, and it's December the 6th, 2025. I'll start with a question. and we're going to look again at the importance of what it means to be born again. Now, the Pastor Aaron had discussed things during our Sabbath class, pardon me, that kind of leads into what we are looking at this morning. So when we think in terms of being born again and how important it is that we realize what it really means to be born again, and we covered this in the last 2 messages. In this third one, I'm going to go in a direction that might be a bit different and that we might not be used to being exposed to this. So I'm going to start off with a question. Did Jesus Christ need to be born again? Okay? Very important. Did Jesus Christ need to be born again? And if we say yes, then sorry, we've got a major problem, because that is not true. Okay? Jesus Christ did not need to be born again. And we should then go to the next question. Was Jesus born of God?
Well,
of course he was born of God. Because if he wasn't born of God, then there would be, again, a major problem. He was born, when we say he was born of God, God was the one that was responsible for his birth. Correct?
yes.
It happened through the Holy Spirit, but it was God who gave that Jesus was born through Mary. So the next question, did Jesus know God perfectly?
Yes.
Of course he did. So if Jesus knew God perfectly, then did he need to be born again? No. Why? Because he's already born with that perfection of knowing God. So to be born again, we're going to look at certain things here before I go into the crest of what we are going to look at. Jesus was sinless. Accordingly, he knew God's character perfectly. Correct? Because if he was sinful, if Jesus had sin in him, then he would have what? Need to be born again. Since he was sinless, he did not need to be born again. Important, very important. Did the writers of the Bible need to be born again?
Yes.
Of course. Every one of the writers of the Bible needed to be born again.
Yes.
Was, and I'm important, these are important questions, okay? Did the Bible, were the Bible writers sinless? No. So they needed to be born again, correct? So if the Bible writers needed to be born again, then they had to write, whatever they wrote, had to come from the person of Jesus Christ. Why? Because he was perfect. He knew God perfectly. To make sure that we understand this whole issue of Jesus' sinlessness, I'm going to read a few verses because it's important that we get this understanding. And John 8, and I'm looking at verse John 8 and verse 46. John 8 verse 46. Which of you, Jesus is talking to people that believed in him, but they had a problem according to what Jesus eventually said to them. Which of you convicts me of sin? Okay? Which means to say, when he's saying this, which of you convicts me of sin? What he's saying, that look, I'm what? Sinless. You cannot convict me of sin. Which one of you are trying to convict me of sin? He's claiming that he's sinless. And if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? So he's tying up what? Which of you convicts me of sin? Okay, he's tying that up with, and if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? So he's tying up with who of you are convicting me of sin with the next statement, that if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? So he's tying up the telling of the truth to what? To him being sinless. So him being sinless means that he is giving the truth. And few other verses we're going to look at. John 14:30. In John chapter 14 and verse 30. I will no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. So the ruler of the world, Satan, had what? Nothing in the person of Jesus Christ. Which means to say there was nothing of Satan's domain in the person of Jesus Christ. I'm going to look at, I've got a few verses, but I'm not going to go and cover all of them. I'm going to now look at Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15. Pardon me. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15. For we do not have a high priest, this is referring to Jesus, who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are. So Jesus was tempted in all points as we are, yet without sin. So here, Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews, which is Paul, I believe, says that yet he was tempted in every possible way that Satan could tempt him, yet without sin. And I'm not going to go into all the details as to what would have been involved in Jesus being tempted in every way like we were tempted. There's too involved to go in there, but I'm just trying to emphasize on this fact that in all points he was tempted, yet he was without sin. Now, we're going to look, keeping in mind that this whole issue of being born again, okay? Keeping that in mind, 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4, and I'm emphasizing this, keeping in mind what it means to be born again. So in 1 John chapter 4, Jesus is the sinless person. He knows God's character perfectly. And here John is teaching us something. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. This is agape love, okay? And everyone,
What chapter?
oh, I'm sorry, it is 1 John chapter 4, and I'm reading verses 7 and 8. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. Agape is of God. That's next portion of that verse. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Okay? So everyone who practices and lives by agape love, clearly states, is born of God. So when we live by agape love, okay, when we live by agape love, what does it say? We are born of God. And being born of God, what's the next statement that is made? And knows God. So everyone that is born of God knows God. Well, what does that mean? Every believer in God all over the world will say, well, I'm a believer in God and I know God. But what is the text itself is clearly telling us that when we have this kind of a love in us, God's agape love. We are born of God, and we know God the way He should be known. The way Jesus taught us about God, we know God in the way He should be known. He who does not have agape does not know God, for God is agape. With that done, I want us now to ask this question and think of it. So Jesus did not need to be born again. Jesus was sinless, and He knew God perfectly, completely and totally. Okay? So, with that in mind, so why did Jesus allow Himself to get baptized? If He was sinless, okay, He had no sin in Him, the devil had nothing on Jesus, He knew God's character perfectly, then why did Jesus allow Himself to be baptized, but by a very particular person? He did not allow Himself to be baptized by anybody else. He allowed Himself to be baptized by one person, and one person alone. And that person was John the Baptist. So why did Jesus, and we're going to look at this in John chapter 3, verses 13 to verse 15. John chapter 3, verses 13 to verse 15. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. So Jesus specifically picked John the Baptist to be baptized. Now he did not need to be baptized. We have made it very clear, the Bible has made it very clear that he was sinless, and here he comes to be baptized. And John tried to prevent him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and are you coming to me? If any person should be baptized, John the Baptist is saying, I am the person that should be baptized, and you are the one that should be baptizing me. But Jesus answered and said to him, here we go, permit it to be so now. Let it happen for now. For thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. So what he's saying here, and when Jesus had spoken to Nicodemus, he had said to Nicodemus that you have to be born of what? Water and the Spirit. Okay? So Jesus is showing what here? By being, he says, look, thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. What is all righteousness? Any thought? What is all righteousness? All righteousness is what? God's righteousness. God's character. We looked at agape. So here he's saying, let this be to fulfill all righteousness. That's the water baptism. So here he is showing us clearly that this was to fulfill all righteousness. Not that he was a sinner in any way that he needed to be baptized. The next point I want to bring out, keeping that in mind, that it's very clear that Jesus was what? Sinless. Correct? So here, I want us to look at the next point. In John chapter 18, there's something extremely important. We've looked at this before, but here we're going to look at it in the context of Jesus. He was baptized to fulfill all righteousness, but look at what happens here in John chapter 18. We looked at all those verses, that Jesus was sinless, there was no sin on him, you could not find any of Satan's activities in the life of Jesus. So here now, he's talking, someone is saying something, and of all the people of all the people we are looking at, we're going to see what Pilate himself had to say about Jesus, okay? Keeping in mind all what we have discussed so far and also his baptism. So here, this is what Pilate ends up doing. We're looking at John chapter 18, and I'm going to read from verse 36 to verse 38. Jesus answered, well, I'll look at verse 35. Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Now look at what Pilate had to say. Pilate said to him, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, Pilate said to the Jews, I find no fault in him at all. Came out of the mouth of Pilate. So Pilate here is telling us what about Jesus? He is what? Sinless. I find no fault in him at all. Nothing. I don't see anything of the devil in him. But you guys, you Jewish people, you Christians, are finding fault in him. How are we? Remember the pastor's message and how things apply to us now? How does this apply to us? When we find fault, Pilate says he finds no fault in Jesus. When we reject Jesus' revelation of the Father, when we reject Jesus' revelation of God's character, what have we done? We have found fault in him. Indirectly, we have found fault with the person of Jesus Christ. That's what they did. They ended up crucifying him. Why? Because they found fault in him. But a Roman governor, who's a Gentile, he finds no fault in him at all. None. And then look at what it says the same thing. This is Pilate, says the same thing in chapter 19 and in verse 4. Pilate then went out again and said to them, can you imagine? He says it once, hoping that somehow it will get through to them. But Pilate then went out again and said to them, behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Twice. Third time. Therefore, when the chief priests, and verse 6 of chapter 19 of John, therefore when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out saying, crucify him, crucify him. Dear ones, we, the Jewish people in the first Advent said, crucify him. We better make sure that we are not doing the same thing today. And how can we be doing the same thing today? Crucify him. How? When we don't accept his revelation of the Father, when we don't accept his revelation of God's character of agape love, indirectly what we are saying, crucify him. Why? Because what he is teaching about God doesn't fit with us. So, here at the end again of verse 6, Pilate clearly says, I find no fault in him. Which means to say, Pilate just confirmed that there was no fault in the person of Jesus Christ. And we read these things, and it has an application there at the first Advent, But how does it have an application for us living here at the second advent? Question again. Do all Christians need to be born again?
Yes, they do.
Even though we are Christians, do we need to be born again?
Yes, yes.
Remember, Pastor Aaron was talking of Isaiah 43 and how, pardon me, those things had its local application, but how does it apply to us living at this end time? So if all Christians, we all can claim that we're born again, okay? And I'll just share this with you. When I was a baby, I was baptized as a Catholic. As a baby, I was baptized, okay? When that baptism happened, when I was baptized as a baby, pardon me, was that baptism, at that baptism, was I born again? No, I was not born again. I was baptized, but I was not born again. So, how does the born again experience happen? Okay, I was born baptized as a baby because of Catholic theology and Catholic way of understanding things. So I was baptized as a baby. But then, at the age of 36, well, before even the age of 36, when I was about 14 years old, 13 years old, and I have shared this with you, I had to go to church because my sister, and in our culture in those days, a girl could not go by herself to church. And it was 5:30 in the morning in Suva, so it is dark, and she wanted to go to church, so somebody had to accompany her. Well, my other brother and myself said, no, we're not going. It's too early in the morning, we're not going. Well, a month, 2, or whatever, God must have impressed me to change my mind. So I accepted, and I told my sister, okay, fine. You want to go to church at 5:30 in the morning? How insane you are, but I'll accompany you because you want to go. So I accompanied her. And I have to tell you this. I don't know what was the length of time, a month or 2 months or whatever it was, as I'm going to church with her every morning at 5:30, something happened to me. I had a spiritual awakening, believe me, dear ones, I tell you. And if anybody tries to teach or say that a Catholic can't be saved, I can tell you in all honesty that's hogwash. Because what I experienced spiritually, I know that has led me to where I am today. But I'm going to a point here. So that time I had an experience. At the age of 36, I became a Bible-believing Christian. Was I born again? Of course I was born again. But how do we know from the Bible? I'm going there. Keep this in mind that we have to look at what's going on. Okay? So do all of us sitting here at the Apostolic Church of God Seventh Day, do you all need to be born again?
Yes.
Wow, praise God. I'm so happy to see you guys all agree. But you were born already. When you first accepted Jesus, didn't you have born again? So why do you have to be born again now? We'll see why. We will see why. Like myself, I was born again. Then age 36 I was born again. Then 7 years after age 36, I'm 43 years old, a major spiritual awakening came from studying the Bible. Major. Did I experience born again? Yes. So here I'm going to look at something that is going to take us as to what this means. Paul, writing in Romans chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, and he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek." Well, why the Jew first? Or if he was writing today, he would have turned around and said, for the Christian first, and then for the non-Christians. Why? For in it, what is the in it? The gospel of Christ. For in the gospel of Christ, for in it, in the gospel of Christ, the righteousness of God is revealed. What is revealed? The righteousness of God. God's what? Remember, he was baptized to fulfill all righteousness. So here, in the gospel of Jesus Christ, that demonstration of his baptism also is revealed the righteousness of God. But the next phase. So the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. So the righteousness of God is revealed from where? From faith to faith. In my case, I was baptized as a baby. Pardon me. Then at the age of 14 or 15, when I went with my sister to the Sacred Heart Cathedral, the Catholic Church in Suva, when I went there, after a couple of months, I had a major spiritual awakening. Is it working faith by faith? When I started becoming a Bible-believing Christian, got baptized again, this time I got baptized into the water, dunked into the water. When I was baptized as a child, they sprinkled water on the forehead. Faith to faith. Was there a faith experience at that time when I was baptized? Of course. 7 years later, as I'm studying the Bible, another major understanding of the scriptures happened to me in the context of God's agape love. 1983. When that experience happened, was it from faith to faith? Of course. So as we Christians are born again and we have our baptism, it does not stop. It keeps going from faith to faith. So here now, as we are learning this agape love of God, God's character, we are moving from what? Faith to faith. I'm going to close with these final thoughts here for part 3. I'll have to do part 4 next Sabbath. When I do part 4 next Sabbath, believe me, dear ones, I'm going to talk in terms of what this is faith to faith and how us living in this final generation, what is involved in us. I've got it here already set out, but I'm not going to do it. My time is up too. Okay? All Christians can claim that they are born again. I was baptized when I was, like I stated, as a baby. Okay? But every one of us still needed to be, born again. For next Sabbath, part 4, something I'm not going to tell you what it's going to be, might cause some controversy in the church. Might. Not that I'm purposely going to do this, but we have to understand with everything we have studied so far, and this whole issue of being born again involves something for us. If we are the final generation people, we are living just before the second advent of Jesus Christ, there is something involved in this context of being born again, from faith to faith. So I'll be covering that next Sabbath. With this, can we close in prayer, please? Our gracious Father, thank you for the awesome God you are. And thank you for Jesus Christ coming to this earth and teaching us the